Just heard from Pavel, 15 years in the UK, on pretty much the first flight he could get back to his native country of Poland in order to help at the border with the influx of refugees from Ukraine. A remarkable vignette that, wasn't it? That he's a military reenactor, as we call them. He reenacts military battles between Poland and Ukraine. But of course, as a consequence of that, he's friends with people on the other side of the border, friends with people in Russia with the same hobby. And because of those contacts and connections that he has, he's been able to insert himself into a very helpful role at that border town. And talking of an immense effort, an incredible effort of will from many people, not unfortunately from this chap. He's called Sir Edward Lee. The knighthood, of course, is an honorific that you're perfectly entitled to ignore. I think I will for the rest of this programme. And he had something to say about this refugee crisis, the biggest since 1945, potentially, if not already, in the House of Commons yesterday.
I think we have to remember that unlike the rest of Europe, we have uniquely liberal labour laws and we speak English. So we are the country of choice for mass immigration. And therefore, I do urge her to, as well as listen to all these humanitarian voices, to listen to the voices of people, for instance, in Lincolnshire, where we feel we've done really our bit in terms of migration from Eastern Europe, where we're under extreme pressure in terms of housing and jobs. I know this is difficult to say, but we have to be honest about this. And may I therefore be a correcting voice in this and congratulate her on her humanitarian but proportionate response and not throwing away the immigration rulebook.
The way stateless Jews from Germany are pouring in from every port of this country is becoming an outrage. I intend to enforce the law to the fullest. In these words, Mr. Herbert Metcalfe, the Old Street magistrate, yesterday referred to the number of aliens entering this country through the back door, a problem to which the Daily Mail has repeatedly pointed. The second bit from 1938, the first bit from 2022, from yesterday in particular. And I don't expect you to get your violins out or anything like that, but just from my point of view, I think we've had more guests on the programme in the last week than we have in the last 10 years put together. And it's been magnificent for me to learn from them, either the ones that are scheduled or the ones that come up unscheduled, but fit more into the category of people who are talking to us about what is going on rather than what they think. But the phone-in element of this programme is always about what people think, or is largely about what people think. And I'm running out of questions to ask you. The question we began the programme with this morning was about the word more, and we did it in the context of soldiers. And with the greatest of respect to Jay and to Mike and to Adam and to Kevin and to Michael and to everybody else who's rung in to answer, nobody has. Nobody can. What does more look like in the context of military support for Ukraine? We did the debate, for want of a better word, yesterday about Zelensky's call for a no-fly zone, for NATO to impose some sort of no-fly zone. The very, very broad consensus, close to unanimous, from all corners of domestic politics, is that it would not be the right thing to do. It would potentially be disastrous. What makes this encounter different from all that have gone before is the willingness, the preparedness, perhaps is a better word to use, of Vladimir Putin to deploy nuclear weapons. And remember, this is, on the border of Russia, so it's not a Middle Eastern war which could be fought at arm's length. That genuine fear of a nuclear escalation underpins most objection to the idea of a no-fly zone. So once that is removed from the table for the purposes of our conversations, there's not a lot left. I think it's fair to say nobody can answer the question of what more would look like. So I shall continue to dig and continue to look for people more embedded in the issues, the background and the possible futures than any of us are, and try to get more on that before the end of the week. 9 after 11 is the time. We'll talk next in about 7 or 8 minutes' time to a colleague, a former colleague of mine who was a captain in the paratroopers and who has something of an insight into the 150 paratroopers who are setting their sights on going to Ukraine. I'm fascinated by that. It's not much of an answer, is it, to the question of what does more look like, but it's an answer at least, albeit one that may have legal complications. Some suggestions, some fairly compelling suggestions actually, that going to fight against an army against which the UK has not declared war could leave people open to charges of war crimes. Quite who would bring those charges. In this case, it would have to be the Crown Prosecution Service, is a conversation for a little later in the game. And then we come to refugees. And again, I'm struggling to find the right question to ask you, because I'm not going to lie to you. To me, it's a no-brainer. To me, it is it's a clear case of moral responsibility, and the case has been clearly recognised by every other country in Europe. This is the point at which things get quite tricky and sticky, isn't it? Because I understand the complaints about domestic pressures. I understand why deeply dishonest people suggest that you can't take refugees into this country unless Yvette Cooper has them in her own spare bedroom, for example. Taxation is there to provide support for people that need it. And in times of crisis and emergency, that support extends to people who were not born here or who have fled here. But then I read those lines from 1938 in the Daily Mail, perhaps inevitably, some would say. The way stateless Jews from Germany are pouring in from every port of this country is becoming an outrage. I intend to enforce the law to the fullest. And then going on to refer to aliens entering the country through the back door and boasting about being a problem to which the Daily Mail has repeatedly pointed. So you know how quickly and how effectively the rhetoric can be constructed on these matters. Listening to LBC over the last few years, you've had a ringside seat at seeing how some people can turn the plight of refugees into a personal popularity quest, into almost an attempt to boost their own profiles and their own political standing by competing to see who can be most disgusting about people most in need of help and support. But I think Sir Edward Lee is wrong. And that is why I'm struggling to work out what question to ask you now, because I don't want you to tell me whether or not you disagree with Sir Edward Lee, or indeed whether you agree with him. But I sense, and having spoken to Pavel, I feel that sense growing, that astonishingly successful demonisation of refugees over the last few years won't work here. I could be wrong. I could be horribly wrong. I probably am horribly wrong, because that's the curse, isn't it, of compassion. You have to cling to it, even in the face of lots and lots of evidence that plenty of people don't want to. But I think that was an absolutely appalling intervention. It's what I said to you at 10 o'clock this morning about the stuff that creeps up on you. The incremental declines that mean you don't notice the milestones. That poster of Farage's, the Breaking Point poster, that was a national shame, a national disgrace. 2 hours later, was it? Joe Cox assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist. And they barely drew breath, the architects of that poster. And this, to me, feels like a similarly despicable moment. I stress again, I could be wrong, but I just wonder whether you agree. What Sir Edward Lee said yesterday, as people are pouring over the Ukrainian border into every neighbouring country, bar Russia and Belarus, obviously, they've got troops pouring in the opposite direction. And as every European country is stepping up to the challenge of offering refuge, we are not. We're offering some refuge. We're offering qualified refuge. It's like our sanctions. They make an announcement, it changes again, and then when you dig into the detail, it doesn't really do what it said on the tin it would do. And yeah, you know, it won't come as any surprise to anybody listening to this programme. It's broken my heart and broken a bit of my spirit over the last few years to see my country turned into a place that snarls and sneers and snipes at refugees. But I think Sir Edward Lee has got this wrong. Or am I just hoping? 0345 60 60 973. Let's clarify one thing before we have to waste time doing so on air. The contrast drawn between women and children coming out of Ukraine and young men, which are always described as coming over on dinghies. In the Belarusian model, it works. It's a very valid point, is that Lukashenko was saying, come one, come all. No realistic claim needed to asylum. We'll just pour you over the border into Poland in order to score political points and cause trouble. But in Syria, and I know Syrian refugees, it really wasn't a case of staying and fighting. Who would you have fought against? Would you have fought against the Syrian army, in which case you'd have been on the same side of the war as ISIS, arguably? Or would you have fought against ISIS, in which case you'd have been on the same side as Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin. So young men came out of Syria because they didn't want to die for causes they didn't believe in. The Free Syrian Army had a crack at offering some sort of alternative to that, but it was small and squashed relatively quickly. So I can only address decent people with consciences. If you're neither of those things, then you carry on gnawing away at whatever rancid bone it is you've got stuck in your chops this morning. That parallel doesn't work. The differences are clear, definitive and demonstrable, okay? If you were a young man in Syria, you would have wanted to get out of there. If you were a young man in Ukraine, you would have wanted to stay there because there was a cause to fight for, there was an opportunity to do so, and there was a path to doing it. In Syria, there just wasn't. So park that. It may be that Sir Edward Lee doesn't understand that distinction. Hopefully he does now. Or it may be that he doesn't care. In which case, the question of whether or not he's got this wrong becomes acute. And obviously, if you're in Lincolnshire, he is speaking for you. He has stood up in the House of Commons and said that you, as a resident of Lincolnshire, do not want Ukrainian refugees to be offered the same sort of sanctuary that is being offered by France, by Poland, by Germany, by Spain, by Portugal, by every country still in the European Union. He speaks for you. Does he speak true? Back to Sir Edward Lee's, for my money, remarkably unpleasant comments, but for your money, perhaps something different. Simon's in Colchester. Simon, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, what a mess, eh? Good grief. Bernard Lee. Oh. Okay, I've got an idea for this, okay? Strip him of his, not
Pardon?
physically, of course.
No.
No, strip him of his knighthood.
Well, he hasn't. All he's done is claim that he speaks for the people of Lincolnshire when he says we've done our bit for Eastern European migration.
He's talking against the overwhelming majority of this country who I'm sure they'd have backwards to help.
Do you think so? Do you think that this is different because you know that they wouldn't demonise dinghies in the red top tabloids if it wasn't popular with large swathes of the population? And I hate to draw this distinction because it almost feels like a beauty contest, but do you think this has landed differently with people who could have been persuaded, for example, to become hateful by Nigel Farage?
Oh, people who...
No, that's focus on the question. Is this a different sort of crisis from the ones that have been successfully weaponised and demonised by racist politicians?
It's the same crisis.
Well, then you haven't got massive public support for it, Simon, unfortunately.
I think the overwhelming majority of people in the war situation or where people are fleeing from persecution or whatever, people in this country would do the right thing.
Well, they didn't, did they, when people were fleeing from Syria? We're passing laws at the moment in our own parliament that are designed to make it impossible to apply for asylum. We had that tale from 1938 complaining about German Jews. Well, no, you know and I know that. But the question I'm really interested in is whether or not this one will land as the other ones should have done but didn't. I don't think we can argue about that, whether or not this is a country that has a warm and compassionate attitude to refugees and asylum seekers. Just because people like you exist, sadly doesn't mean that we can extrapolate from your existence a massive majority across the country. It's fairly clear that if there's a massive majority of compassion and sympathy for refugees and asylum seekers in this country, we'd have a very different government, a very different Home Secretary, and almost certainly no Brexit on the cards. We contemplate the comments made by Sir Edward Lee in the House of Commons yesterday. Should we refresh our memories? I think we should.
I think we have to remember that unlike the rest of Europe, we have uniquely liberal labour laws and we speak English. So we are the country of choice for mass immigration. And therefore, I do urge her to, as well as listen to all these humanitarian voices, to listen to the voices of people, for instance, in Lincolnshire, where we feel we've done really our bit in terms of migration from Eastern Europe, where we're under extreme pressure in terms of housing and jobs. I know this is difficult to say, but we have to be honest about this. And may I therefore be a correcting voice in this and congratulate her on her humanitarian but proportionate response and not throwing away the immigration rule book.
Gosh, so much there, isn't there? There's a conflation of migration with refugees. There is a claim to speak for the people of Lincolnshire, and for an ardent Brexiter, as they call themselves, ardent. As an ardent Brexiter, there's a bit of an accidental slip up there by describing our labour laws as being the most liberal in Europe. We were often told that was another reason for leaving, wasn't it? To tear up the red tape and the regulations, make things more liberal. So well done, Eddie. 3 enormous clangers there. One might say weapons grade. Jonathan's in Willoughby, which I believe is in Lincolnshire. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I'm, to be honest, mate, completely disgusted that we're even listening to that on behalf of our county. I mean, it's definitely not the first time that we've heard similar things on our behalf, because, you know, even my other half said when she moved here with me, she says, you know, I thought this place was all, you know, anti-immigration this and, you know, racism that. It's not. It's a fantastic county with such good history. It's beautiful. And the amount of migrants we've got over here, a lot, but they're fantastic people.
It was because of particular locuses as well, work-wise, wasn't it? It was because of, sort of huge plants in place, and I mean, there's the agricultural tradition in Lincolnshire, which demands an awful lot of seasonal work, and then I think there were sort of warehouses and Amazon type operations as well that became a focus of some journalism.
The county is enormous, and if you look in the fields in the summer, it's just waves upon waves of fantastic people getting on with their life and really being a part of what Lincolnshire is all about. And he says we don't want refugees over here. The next town over from Willoughby, which is Alford, again another town completely steeped with history. You know, the guys there now are taking donations and you know, sending across basically aid to Ukraine as a town. You know, they've got plastic boxes. The local people are coming and filling it up. I'm in the process of printing some banners now because that's what I do, free of charge, to try and help get these people something. And, you know, I think I can speak for the local people when I say, if we want refugees over here, they can stay in my backyard, you know, in my spare room.
We find room.
I'll put a bed in the shed if I have to, do you know what I mean? But he doesn't speak for us, and I can assure you that. It's actually just quite infuriating.
I can tell you've taken it personally, and that's the point. He can say that he speaks for himself, or he could say that he speaks for perhaps some of his constituents, but to say that he speaks for the people of Lincolnshire it's actually really ugly, isn't it? Yes, I think you might be right.
Because these people, I mean, my nephew has a Lithuanian mother.
Right.
He's a fantastic, smashing little kid. She's amazing. Her family's over there worried now, do you know what I mean? And,
yes, of course.
You know, we're trying to help her. He just seems to think that he can say that on behalf of all of us. I swear, I reckon if he came down here, stood in the town centre and said it, you know, he wouldn't get the best reaction, let's put it that way.
Well, who knows? I mean, you know, this programme can be something of a safe space, I suppose, for people possessed of views like yours and views like mine, but I don't know. I just wonder whether this is different. Jonathan ties them together inevitably. Edward Lee tried to conflate them. But the idea that if you're uncomfortable with people coming here to work and live because they've got better opportunities here than they had in their home country, then you will be equally uncomfortable with vulnerable people or women and children and older people wanting to come here fleeing war. That seems to me to be at the heart of the error, but as Jonathan reminds us, it's pretty grim to be passionately opposed to the other one as well. Although I've got one... hang on, I have to be careful on this one. I don't want to drop anybody in it. So I got a tweet that says, I am from Lincolnshire and he is right. But it came in while I was talking to Jonathan, so I'm going to hold off from attributing that one or identifying anybody who might have sent it, because I wouldn't want to paint you as suggesting that Edward Lee is right when you were actually agreeing with Jonathan. Tom, it's 11:39. Dan's in Spalding. Dan, which is also in Lincolnshire. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I was pretty disgusted by his comments. You know, it's a totally different situation. Look, I've lived a few different places in the country, and Lincolnshire does have, the work isn't great, the housing isn't great, all the rest of it. Sure. It doesn't matter, James. Now, look, I've got to say, I'm coming from a more emotional place than a logical place, maybe.
Okay.
But I was disgusted by what he said. They're not migrants. They're not coming over here looking for a job. I'm seeing images of a city under siege, being bombed. People, I can't imagine what it's like there. I'm so emotionally affected by it, like in no way before. It seems.
Really? Why? Why do you think that? Is it because we're seeing hearing such stark reports from Ukraine and getting such clear pictures in our minds?
Yes, and I'm watching it in real time, and it seems a lot simpler. Like, I've heard people say, "Oh, we don't care about Syria. What, you can't care about this?" And to me, I don't understand Syria. Syria, like, if you want to use that as a comparison, Assad's fighting ISIS. It's terrible. Human life is tragedy. I can't understand it in the same way that I can see men kissing their families goodbye and putting them on a train and staying to fight. It's made me, this is how ridiculous it is, it's made me, a man in his 40s, think that going over there to fight would be the right thing to do. I mean, all I would do is soak up a few Russian bullets. It'd be pointless.
You and me both, Dan. You and me both.
But the feeling's there, James. Honestly, it feels like
that. It's a sort of furious impotence, isn't it? I wish there was something I could do, but of course there isn't, as you recognise.
And it's using. I don't know. I don't really know. I heard what he said. I was disgusted.
Yeah.
It seems, I think people see it as a very different situation. If they don't, they will do, because it's going to get worse. Can you imagine being there? They're surrounded. The water's going to run out. Their electricity is going to go. The food's going to go. It's unbelievable. And what are we doing?
We're putting hoops in place that they're going to have to jump through if they want to come here, while every other country in Europe has essentially rolled out the welcome mat.
Let me say this: if a bully takes your dinner money, it doesn't end there. He doesn't say thanks for that. He comes back the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And
you're absolutely right. We've seen that over the last 20 years, haven't we? Never mind the last 20 days.
I mean, I'm a little bit younger than you, but we're the same generation. I grew up knowing that the old fellas that used to drink where my mum used to work had been in a war. I grew up with World War II films on the TV. I grew up with the idea that we were the good guys. And now I know the world's a messy, dark place, but sure, if there's any time to actually act, if we can't go for them and fight, at least we can help the people fleeing.
Yes, and the distinction is clear. I mean, there's two distinctions to be drawn, and you're right to remind us of the other one. So the one is between what people choose to call economic migrants, unless, of course, they're moving out of this country into other countries, in which case they're expat workers. That to me is a bogus complaint anyway, as we've seen the massive holes left in our workforce by people who took Brexit voters at their word when they said that they wanted you to go back where you came from. Shortages everywhere from haulage to the NHS, never mind farming and veterinary services and all the rest of it. So he's making that conflation, which is ugly and wrong. He's doing what this kind of rhetoric always does, which is hoping to avoid questions about class and questions about equality by encouraging people on the wrong end of the social contract to punch down at people who are below them. But Dan, I'll take a moment, if I may, to focus on Dan's point about Syria and other countries. I don't think it's all done in bad faith. I don't think it's all done in a kind of holier than thou, aren't I wonderful, everyone who doesn't agree with me is the scum of the earth kind of way. But two wrongs never make a right. So you don't respond to people showing compassion to Ukrainian refugees by saying, well, it's disgusting, why aren't you showing compassion to Syrian refugees as well? That would be ideal. But it's not a pertinent point at the time of compassion being shown to some human beings to attack the people showing it. I can't believe this needs explaining. It's a corruption of left-wing politics in this country that's been underway for, I suppose, almost exactly 7 years, and is thankfully now finally in retreat. But a lot of these people are still out there with their T-shirts and badges that they think somehow denote moral superiority. There is also the simple question of proximity, whether you like it or not. You will notice your neighbour being burgled a lot more keenly than you will somebody in Paris or Poland. It's simple human nature. I have a huge impatience for people at times like this who get cross about compassion being shown to person X because it's not being shown to person Y. Of a very different order is the disgusting conduct that we're seeing at the border with regard to black and Asian students and others trying to get out of Ukraine and being treated with base racism by people controlling those borders. Ukrainian people and Polish people, I think, controlling those borders, certainly Ukrainian people. But again, the existence of racism among those Ukrainians is not an argument against showing compassion to these ones. ones, or those ones, or any other ones. So that's real head wobble stuff, and it's where the so-called left can sometimes be just as backwards and just as bad, actually, for what you might call objective humanitarian aims as the right. Although right now I wouldn't put anybody quite as bad as Sir Edward Lee. The people of Lincolnshire have done their bit when it comes to Ukrainians, for example, and therefore Priti Patel's complicated and red tape-ridden route to this country, in direct and shameful contrast to the route offered by every other country in Europe, is the correct course, says Edward Lee, an MP for Lincolnshire. And more importantly, perhaps, judging by my switchboard, he claims to speak for the people of Lincolnshire. Number one, does he? 03456060973. And number two, I have the guard as I get older against getting carried away. I worry sometimes that you sort of do this job for so long, you start doing it by numbers, and I don't want to ever do that. So I think this is really disgusting, but I don't want to be accusing politicians of being disgusting every single day. It'd be ugly and it would be monotonous and it would probably not be true. But every now and then you have a responsibility to call it as you see it. And I can't believe that I heard those words at this time. That's the point. At this time, you know, in the same window that we're seeing the consequences of the bombing in Ukraine, on the same day that we saw a 6-year-old girl being operated on in vain by doctors trying to save her life, Edward Lee stood up in the House of Commons and said, well, let's be careful about letting too many of them in, when the rest of Europe has said, come one, come all. And, I mean, to his, if he's capable of feeling shame, his claim that we have the most liberal employment laws in Europe being a reason not to let them come here makes an absolute nonsense of an awful lot of support for the Brexit that I believe he championed. But hey-ho, Brexit and hypocrisy, who'd ever have thunk it? Tim's in Lincoln. Tim, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James. Yes, I'm from Lincoln, and it's a shame that I have to call today to apologise for...
You don't have to apologise, you just have to tell me whether...
For what an MP that represents one of our local constituencies says. It's an ill-thought-out comment. Lincolnshire does seem to be tarnished in this pro-Brexit area.
Well, it was a heavy vote, nationally speaking, although there were plenty of people who voted Remain. And you did have,
exactly.
I think the seasonal working and the Amazon depots gave an emphasis, didn't they, to the issue in Lincolnshire that wouldn't have applied, for example, in the middle of Chiswick.
It was funny because I answered the door this morning to the delivery man who asked me to give my surname. And I went to spell it because it's a Polish name. And he said, it's okay, I'm Polish. Just tell me how you actually say it.
So he's teaching you how to say your own name.
Exactly. And that really sums up Lincolnshire, in my view. I don't believe we've done our bit. I don't believe...
But it makes it sound like a burden. So taking in a refugee could be construed as a burden in the sense that you're offering shelter and support to people who are not going to get it anywhere else. But coming and doing a job somewhere and needing a roof over your head, that's not a sacrifice that's made by other people. He's got it backwards. Coming to do, as we've seen with the farms, they're coming to do jobs that no one else will do. And Edward Lee thinks we're doing them a favour.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, isn't it, when you can't actually try to better your life and safety and security in the 21st century, and you're faced with comments from higher authority like Sir Edward Lee saying, comments like that. It's disgusting. He doesn't speak for Lincolnshire. He doesn't speak for me. And, I think the best he can do is apologise and retract the comment.
Yeah, well, don't hold your breath, not with this lot. Thank you, Tim. This unsigned text, his comments speak to your questions on Monday regarding the Nationality and Borders Bill, James, and which voters exactly they were targeting with this sort of UKIP policy making. You're right, I just don't know whether it works. I can see how Farage managed to turn British people against men fleeing ISIS and Putin in Syria, because to stay would be to be either killed or signed up by one side or the other. I get how he managed to pull off that despicable trick, but I don't know that it's going to be effective in this context, in the context of Ukrainian women and children fleeing Ukraine, to be told by Sir Edward Lee saying, oh no, we've already done our bit, the rest of Europe can take more of you. Besides, you speak our language. So that's the reason why you definitely shouldn't be allowed to come here in numbers. What an absolute charmer. I wonder what you have to do in this country to lose a knighthood. So I better squeeze in Lana in Rochester because her family are in Ukraine. And then Theo Usherwood will no doubt be cavorting into the studio. Lana, what would you like to say?
Oh, a lot of things, really, but I'm not sure we have plenty of time. First, all this experience with applying for a visa, it's crazy. Yeah. I lived in the UK for 23 years.
Yes.
I'm a British citizen. Every year, to have my family here, we were applying for a visa because they just couldn't see us, the parents, sister. And now for my husband's mum, we needed to basically apply for a visitor visa and pay 70 euros on top of it because we didn't apply in Ukraine. And she was told today it will take 4 to 6 weeks.
Where is she now?
She's in Hungary on her own, doesn't speak language.
Has she fled? She's got out of Ukraine into Hungary?
We got her out on the 23rd. Basically, we put her on a train from Kiev. She was in the middle of Kiev near Boryspil.
Yes.
And, we managed to get her out on time, but it took 3 days to get my mom and sister from where they were, and we didn't sleep for 3 nights because we were monitoring roads, bombing, diversions, and they left with nothing. And you know what? When they reached Moldovan border, they didn't want to cross. They are petrified to be treated as refugees. Ukrainians are proud people. Yes. They want to support themselves. I can support them here financially. And actually, they worry about housing, but nobody can get here. Even
so your family should be able to come here. They should be, as I understand it.
They came. Announcement yesterday was great, but actually you can't do anything. You can't go and apply. They went to Moldovan embassy today.
Yes.
And they told to visit British side, and there is nothing to apply because it's not ready yet.
So it's just words in the House of Commons, words from politicians.
Absolutely. Because I try to contact Patel, I try to do anything. Obviously, nobody replies to me now. It's all on the paper, but in reality, my family now in the middle of Moldova, and I'm grateful for all of the people who help Ukrainian people. They are prepared to work. My mom, she's 65, yes, and she doesn't want to rely on me. Yet I can support her financially. And she say, can I do this job? Can I do this job? I still can work. I still can be useful. And this breaks my heart because I think a whole policy of refugee in England is misused because people can be useful to the UK. I know my clients, they don't have enough workers, restaurants don't have enough workers, pack houses don't have enough workers, and yet there were barriers, red tape for people to work. If they integrated, at least temporarily, to support themselves.
Which is what every other country in Europe is thinking of doing. I've got PMQs about to start, but I don't want to say goodbye yet. I want to keep in touch with you because I want to find out about your family's journey here.
Yes,
just to go back to your mother-in-law. She's stuck in Hungary trying to get the paperwork together to come to her son in England.
Absolutely. And we are English and we can't help her in any way. And this year only, we paid 70,000 in taxes, just to be precise, of what we paid, me and my husband.
Yeah.
We can support several people without relying on a system. All we want is to help them mentally because they don't believe the war will carry on. They hope couple more days, wait couple more days, maybe I can move back. And it's painful to tell them that it will not stop for 2 days because he will not stop, Putin will not stop because he has nothing to lose. And this is what people need to be aware of. If all of us do our bit to stop him, maybe he will not carry on. But if he conquers Ukraine,
he won't stop there any more than he stopped after Georgia or Chechnya or Crimea. So Just to drag it back, so what are you doing? Just sitting and waiting for hoping?
I try to contact MPs.
I know you do. I can tell that you're not letting this one go. But in terms of what actually you can do if they don't respond to you, who's your local MP?
I don't remember her name. She's a lady from Rochester. But my husband today spent an hour on the phone to embassy, and it basically, I will be sarcastic now, it's computer said no. We don't have a policy yet. Computer said no.
You don't get much more integrated than a Little Britain joke, do you, Lana? In the
No, I've been here for 23 years, so, my son is born here, and you know what? It hurts me when he said, he's 12, and he's saying, Mom, I'm old enough to defend England if I need to. You can't stop me. And I never again want him to say that.
No, I understand.
It's not right. And, they are prepared to work. They want to support. They don't have to be treated as refugees.
You don't have to do this. It's only people like Sir Edward Lee that make you think you have to do this. Most of us, we don't need persuading or convincing that your mum deserves to be with her daughter at a time when your country is under bombardment from a vicious dictator, or that your mother-in-law deserves to be with her son. It's just people like Edward Lee who are...
I would like to see him face to face and see what he can say. And I would like him to talk to my friends who are now in shelters, and every morning we check, are you still alive? Are you still alive? And we are talking to them while the bombing is going on. And you know what I do? I send them photographs of the nation from my company, from my friends, just to show that they are not on their own. And I am grateful for all of the people who help. I really am. Because not everybody is like him. I'm sorry for crying. I'm sorry.
Hey, why are you apologising? I'm sorry.
I don't have a right to cry right now.
I'm sorry. Kelly Tolhurst, I think, is the Conservative MP for Rochester. We might see whether we can speed things up a bit on your behalf. Lana, I want you to make sure that the producer has your details, because I want to keep track of these attempts to get your family here. Because theoretically, and I suppose this is a form of defence for Edward Lee, theoretically, I think they're people who should be able to come here relatively easily. But announcing that siblings and parents and adult children and grandparents can come here is not the same as ensuring that adults and siblings and people can come here. So there it is.